When my husband tried to steal half my fortune, I gave the judge an envelope, and he laughed at him. My name is Margaret Stevens, and at 63 years old, I never imagined I would be standing in a courtroom fighting the man I had loved for nearly 4 decades. But life has a way of showing you who people really are when money enters the picture. I sat in that wooden chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap, watching Richard across the aisle. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his expensive suit pressed to perfection. He looked every bit the successful man he pretended to be. But I knew the truth. After 38 years of marriage, I knew everything. The courtroom smelled of old wood and disappointment. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, each second feeling like an eternity. My lawyer, a kind woman named Patricia who reminded me of my daughter, sat beside me shuffling papers. She had tried to prepare me for this day, but nothing could really prepare you for watching your marriage dissolve in front of strangers. Richard wanted half of everything, half of the money my grandmother had left me, half of the inheritance that had been in my family for 3 generations. Money he had never earned, never worked for, never even appreciated. I thought back to when we first met. I was 25, working as a teacher at Roosevelt Elementary. Richard was 28, charming and ambitious, selling insurance door to door. He had shown up at my apartment one rainy evening, soaked to the bone, asking if I wanted to protect my future. I had laughed and invited him in for coffee. That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into dates. Dates turned into a lifetime together, or so I thought. In those early years, we were happy. We were poor, but we were happy. We lived in a tiny apartment with furniture we found at yard sales. Richard would bring home flowers he picked from the park. I would make dinners that stretched across 3 meals. We dreamed together about the life we would build. When grandmother Eleanor passed away 15 years ago, everything changed. She left me $2 million, her house on Maple Street, and a portfolio of investments that had grown steadily over the years. I remember the day the lawyer called. I was sitting in our kitchen, the yellow wallpaper we had hung together peeling at the corners. Richard was reading the newspaper. The money was mine, legally and clearly. Grandmother Eleanor had made sure of that. She had never trusted Richard, though she never said it directly. She would just look at him with those knowing eyes and pat my hand, saying, "Keep what is yours, Margaret. Always keep what is yours." At first, Richard seemed happy for me. We paid off our modest debts. We took a vacation to the coast, something we had never been able to afford. I invested most of it, wanting to be responsible, wanting to honor grandmother Eleanor's legacy. Richard agreed it was the smart thing to do, but slowly things shifted. Richard stopped working as hard at his job. He started making comments about my inheritance. "We should buy a bigger house," he would say. "We should get a new car. We deserve to enjoy life." I would remind him gently that the money was invested for our future, for security, for the grandchildren we hoped to have one day. He would nod and smile, but I could see something cold forming behind his eyes. Then came the affairs. The first one I discovered by accident, a text message on his phone that popped up while we were having dinner. "Missing you," it said, with a little heart. From someone named Jessica. When I confronted him, he denied it at first, then admitted it was just a friendship, then finally confessed it had been going on for 6 months. He cried. He begged. He promised it would never happen again. And fool that I was, I believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to believe him. When you have spent nearly 4 decades with someone, walking away seems impossible. You keep hoping the man you married is still in there somewhere. There was no Jessica after that, but there was Linda, and after Linda came Stephanie. Each time the same pattern. Denial, then admission, then tears and promises. Each time I forgave him because I thought that was what good wives did. I thought that was what love looked like. My daughter Emma saw through it all. She would visit on Sundays with her husband Tom and my 2 grandchildren, and she would pull me aside. "Mom, why do you stay?" she would ask. "You deserve so much better." I would tell her that marriage was complicated, that her father was going through something, that we were working on it, but the truth was, I was afraid of being alone. afraid of admitting failure, afraid of what people would think. It was my grandson Benjamin who finally opened my eyes. He was 7 years old, sitting at my kitchen table doing homework, when Richard came home late again, smelling of perfume that was not mine. Benjamin looked up at me with those innocent brown eyes and said, "Grandma, why does Grandpa make you sad?" Out of the mouths of children, as they say. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, really looking at my life for the first time in years. I was 62 years old, and I was miserable. Richard did not love me. He loved my money. He loved the security I provided. He loved having a wife who asked no questions and made no demands. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not Patricia, not yet, just a consultation to understand my rights. The lawyer, an older gentleman named Harold, looked at me over his glasses and said, "Mrs. Stevens, in this state, inheritance received during marriage is considered separate property, unless it has been commingled. Did you keep the money separate?" I had. Grandmother Eleanor's money had never touched our joint accounts. It sat in investments under my name alone. Harold smiled. "Then you have nothing to worry about. That money is yours." I filed for divorce the following week. Richard was shocked. He actually seemed surprised that I would leave him. "After everything we have been through?" he said, as if I was the one who had betrayed our vows repeatedly. His shock turned to anger when he realized I was serious, and his anger turned to greed when he learned about the divorce proceedings. That was when he hired Martin Cole, a lawyer known for going after money in divorces. Martin was younger than Richard, maybe 45, with slicked back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. The demands started coming. Richard wanted half of everything. Half the house, half the investments, half the inheritance. Martin argued that Richard had supported me emotionally during the years after Grandmother Eleanor died, that he had contributed to the marriage, that he deserved compensation for his time and effort. Time and effort. As if 38 years of marriage was a job he had clocked into each day. As if my heart was a paycheck he had earned. Patricia, my lawyer, was furious. "This is ridiculous," she said during one of our meetings. "The law is clear. That money is yours." But judges can be unpredictable, especially if Richard's lawyer paints a sympathetic picture. That worried me. Martin was good at his job. He could make Richard seem like a devoted husband who had been blindsided by a cold, ungrateful wife. He could make me seem like a woman who had held money over her husband's head for years. I needed something more than the law on my side. I needed truth, so I started gathering evidence. Every hotel receipt I had found over the years, every credit card statement showing dinners for two when he claimed to be working late, every photograph I had discovered on his old phones before he learned to delete them. Text messages I had screenshotted, emails I had saved. But the real treasure came from somewhere unexpected. My friend Dorothy had a son who worked in information technology. At her suggestion, I asked him if there was a way to recover deleted messages from Richard's phone. He said he could try if I could get the phone for a few hours. One Saturday, when Richard was in the shower, I took his phone to Dorothy's house. Her son worked his magic, and what he found was astounding. Years of messages. Hundreds of them. To women I had never heard of. Making plans, sharing intimate photos, even discussing how he would cash out once I finally gave in and gave him access to the money. In one message to a woman named Veronica, Richard had written, "Just a few more years of playing the devoted husband, and I will be set for life." She is too naive to see through it. Reading those words felt like a knife to my chest, but it also freed something in me. Any lingering doubt about my decision vanished. This man did not deserve my mercy. I had Dorothy's son print everything out, hundreds of pages of evidence. I put them in a large manila envelope and sealed it carefully. Then I waited. The court date arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in March. I wore a simple navy dress, pearls that had belonged to my mother, and sensible shoes. I wanted to look dignified, respectable. Richard wore his power suit, probably paid for with money he had taken from our joint account without asking. The courtroom filled slowly. Patricia sat beside me, her hand occasionally patting mine for reassurance. Across the aisle, Richard sat with Martin, whispering and pointing at papers. Richard would not look at me. I was glad for that. Judge William Henderson entered, and we all stood. He was in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. I had heard good things about him from Patricia. "He does not tolerate nonsense," she had said. "Just tell the truth and trust the process." Martin started first, laying out Richard's case. He painted a picture of a devoted husband who had stood by his wife through thick and thin. He talked about emotional support, about companionship, about the sacrifices Richard had made. He made it sound like Richard had been a saint. Then it was Patricia's turn. She was clear and precise, explaining that the inheritance was separate property, that Richard had no legal claim to it, that he was attempting to profit from a marriage he had repeatedly betrayed. Martin objected. "My client's personal life has no bearing on his entitlement to marital assets." Judge Henderson nodded. "That may be true, counselor, but I will hear what the plaintiff's attorney has to say." Patricia presented our case. She showed bank statements, proving the money had always been separate. She showed the will from grandmother Eleanor. She showed documentation of our assets and how clearly divided they were. Martin countered every point with arguments about Richard's contributions to the household. When Patricia pointed out that I had been the primary breadwinner even before the inheritance, Martin argued that Richard's moral support was invaluable. I could see Judge Henderson was listening carefully, but he had not made any indication of which way he was leaning. Then Martin made his final pitch. "Your Honor, my client gave nearly 4 decades of his life to this marriage. He stood by Mrs. Stevens through everything. He deserves to be compensated for that loyalty. We are asking for half of the inheritance, half of all investment returns, and spousal support for the rest of his life. It is only fair." The words hung in the air. Half of everything. Support for life. For a man who had cheated on me repeatedly and plotted to steal from me. Judge Henderson turned to me. "Mrs. Stevens, do you have anything you would like to say before I make my decision?" This was my moment. I stood slowly, my knees shaking slightly. Patricia had coached me on what to say, but now that the moment was here, I felt overwhelmed. "Your Honor," I began, my voice quieter than I intended. I cleared my throat. "Your Honor, I have been married to Richard for 38 years. For most of those years, I believed we were building a life together. I believed in him. I forgave him things that perhaps should not have been forgiven because I took my marriage vows seriously." Richard shifted in his seat. Martin put a hand on his arm as if to steady him. "But I have learned," I continued, "that sometimes loyalty is not returned. Sometimes trust is broken beyond repair. And sometimes people want to take from you not because they earned it, but because they think you are too weak to stop them." I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope. It was thick, heavy with all the evidence inside. I walked slowly toward the judge's bench. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of my footsteps. "Your Honor, I would like to submit this as evidence. It contains documentation of my husband's activities throughout our marriage, documentation he thought I did not know about, documentation that shows exactly what kind of loyalty he has shown me." I handed the envelope to the bailiff, who brought it to Judge Henderson. The judge opened it carefully and began to read. His eyes moved across the first page, then the second. Then he started flipping through faster, his eyebrows rising. Martin stood. "Your Honor, I object. We were not informed about any additional evidence." Judge Henderson held up a hand without looking up from the papers. "Sit down, counselor." The judge kept reading. The silence in that courtroom was deafening. I could hear Richard breathing heavily across the aisle. I could see Martin's jaw clenching. Patricia squeezed my hand. Judge Henderson read for what felt like an hour but was probably only 10 minutes. Then he closed the envelope and looked at Richard. Really looked at him. "Mr. Stevens," the judge said, his voice measured but with an edge to it. "I have been on the bench for 23 years. I have seen a lot of things. I have heard a lot of arguments. I have witnessed many attempts to manipulate the court system, but this is something special." Richard swallowed hard. Martin started to stand, but the judge waved him down again. "Your attorney has argued eloquently about your loyalty and dedication. He has painted a picture of a devoted husband who deserves to be rewarded for decades of support. And yet, what I have here tells a very different story." Judge Henderson held up the envelope. "What I have here is evidence of numerous affairs. What I have here is hotel receipts, text messages, emails, and photographs that span years. What I have here are your own words, Mr. Stevens, discussing how you were playing devoted husband while waiting to cash out on your wife's inheritance." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Martin's face went pale. Richard looked like he might be sick. "Your Honor," Martin tried, "the private conduct of my client does not change the legal facts of this case." Judge Henderson looked at Martin with something close to contempt. "Counselor, you are absolutely right. The legal facts are clear. Mrs. Stevens' inheritance is separate property under state law. Your client has no legal claim to it whatsoever. But you did not just argue the law, you argued equity, you argued fairness. You argued that your client deserves compensation for his loyalty." The judge paused, and I swear I saw the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Well, I have reviewed his loyalty," Judge Henderson continued. "I have reviewed it thoroughly, and I find it severely lacking." Then Judge Henderson did something I will never forget. He looked at Richard and he started to laugh. Not a big, loud laugh, just a soft chuckle that grew slightly louder. It was the laugh of a man who had seen through everything and found it absurd. "Mr. Stevens," the judge said, still with that edge of amusement in his voice, "you have some nerve. You have spent years betraying your wife, plotting to steal her inheritance, and treating your marriage like a business transaction. And now you stand in my courtroom and ask me to reward you for it?" The judge shook his head, the smile fading into something more serious. "Not in my courtroom, not today, not ever." He turned to Patricia. "Counselor, I am ruling in favor of your client on all counts. The inheritance remains Mrs. Stevens' separate property. All investment returns remain hers. There will be no spousal support awarded to Mr. Stevens. In fact, given the evidence presented here today, I am awarding Mrs. Stevens full ownership of the marital home and all joint assets as compensation for Mr. Stevens' pattern of deception and betrayal." Martin shot to his feet. "Your Honor, that is excessive. My client has rights." Judge Henderson fixed him with a steady gaze. "Your client has the right to leave this courtroom without being held in contempt, Counselor. I suggest he exercise that right immediately. We are adjourned." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Richard sat frozen. Martin was gathering papers frantically, whispering urgently to him. Around us, people were standing, talking, some looking at me with expressions of sympathy and respect. Patricia hugged me tight. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." I felt numb. Relief, vindication, sadness, and exhaustion all mixed together. I had won, but it did not feel like victory. It felt like the end of something that had died a long time ago but that I had kept on life support out of fear and habit. Richard finally looked at me as he stood to leave. There was no anger in his eyes, just defeat and maybe a flicker of shame. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it and walked out. I never spoke to him again. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Richard moved to another state, last I heard. The house on Maple Street became mine alone, along with everything grandmother Eleanor had left me and everything we had built together in better days. Emma cried when I told her what happened. "I am so proud of you, Mom," she said. "Grandma Eleanor would be proud too." I thought about that a lot in the months that followed. Grandmother Eleanor had known. She had seen through Richard from the beginning. That was why she made sure the money was protected. Why she had always told me to keep what was mine. She had been looking out for me even after she was gone. I started building a new life. I joined a book club at the library. I took an art class at the community center, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for. I spent more time with Emma and her family. I traveled to places I had always dreamed of seeing. One day, about a year after the divorce, I was sitting in my garden when Dorothy came over for tea. We sat in the shade of the old oak tree, watching butterflies dance among the flowers. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked me. "Ending the marriage, I mean. After all those years?" I thought about it for a moment, really thought about it. "No," I said finally. "I regret staying as long as I did. I regret not listening to what my heart was telling me. I regret trying to save something that was already gone. But ending it? No. That was the bravest thing I have ever done." Dorothy nodded. "You know what I think? I think you gave yourself the greatest gift. Freedom." She was right. For the first time in decades, I was free. Free from wondering where Richard was. Free from the pain of his betrayals. Free from pretending everything was fine when it was not. Free to be just Margaret, not Richard's wife, not the woman who forgave too much, just me. I'm 64 now. I still live in the house on Maple Street. Emma visits every Sunday with Tom and the grandchildren. Benjamin is 8 now and wants to be an astronaut. His little sister Sophie is 5 and wants to be a veterinarian. I tell them both they can be anything they want to be, and I mean it. I have enough money to be comfortable for the rest of my life, thanks to Grandmother Eleanor's wisdom and good investments. But more than that, I have peace. I have dignity. I have the respect of my daughter and grandchildren. I have friendships that are real and honest. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea and think about everything that happened. About the young girl who fell in love with a charming insurance salesman. About the years of trying to hold together something that was falling apart. About standing in that courtroom and finally saying enough. The judge's laughter still echoes in my memory sometimes. It was not a cruel laugh. It was the laugh of someone who saw the absurdity of it all, who saw a man trying to profit from betrayal and called it what it was. That laugh gave me back something I had lost, my sense of worth. I learned important lessons through all of this. I learned that love without respect is not really love at all. I learned that forgiveness is important, but so is knowing when to walk away. I learned that money can bring out the worst in people, but it can also give you the freedom to escape those people. Most importantly, I learned that it is never too late to stand up for yourself. 62, 63, 64, these are not ages where life is over. These are ages where wisdom meets courage, where you finally understand what matters and what does not. If I could go back and talk to that young teacher who invited the insurance salesman in for coffee, I would tell her to pay attention to those little warning signs. I would tell her that charm is not the same as character. I would tell her to listen to Grandmother Eleanor more carefully, but I would also tell her to be gentle with herself, that she did the best she could with what she knew at the time, and that when she finally found the strength to walk away, she would discover that the best years might still be ahead. The house on Maple Street is quiet these days, but it is a good quiet. It is peaceful. The yellow wallpaper in the kitchen is long gone, replaced with soft blue paint that makes me smile every morning. The garden is full of flowers I chose. Every room reflects the woman I have become, not the woman I thought I had to be. Dorothy sometimes jokes that I should start dating again. I laugh and tell her I am perfectly happy as I am, and I mean it. Maybe someday I will meet someone kind and honest who respects me for who I am, but if I do not, that is fine too. I have learned to enjoy my own company, to find joy in simple things, to be content. Last week, Benjamin came over after school. He had gotten in trouble for defending another kid from bullies. Emma was upset, but I pulled Benjamin aside and told him I was proud of him for standing up for someone who could not stand up for themselves. Sometimes, I told him, the right thing is also the hard thing. But that does not mean you should not do it. He hugged me tight and said, "Like when you stood up to Grandpa?" Out of the mouths of children again. "Yes," I said, "exactly like that. The years go by faster now. Sophie is starting first grade soon. Emma and Tom are talking about moving to a bigger house. Life keeps moving forward, as it always does. But when people ask me about Richard, about the divorce, about what happened in that courtroom, I tell them the truth. I tell them about the envelope, about the evidence, about the judge who laughed at a man who tried to steal what was never his. And then I tell them the most important part. I tell them that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what is hurting you, even if it means walking alone for a while. I tell them that peace is worth more than companionship built on lies. I tell them that you are never too old to start over. The envelope that I handed to Judge Henderson that day contained more than just evidence of affairs and betrayal. It contained proof of my own strength, proof that I had been paying attention all along, proof that I was not the naive fool Richard thought I was. Grandmother Eleanor's voice sometimes comes to me in quiet moments. "Keep what is yours, Margaret," she had said. And I did. I kept my dignity, I kept my self-respect, I kept my inheritance, and most importantly, I kept my future. Looking back now, I see that day in the courtroom not as an ending but as a beginning. The beginning of a life lived on my own terms, the beginning of peace, the beginning of truly understanding my own worth. And when Judge Henderson laughed, he was not just laughing at Richard. He was celebrating truth. He was celebrating justice. He was celebrating a woman who finally said no. That laughter was music to my ears. It still is. If this story touched your heart, or reminded you of your own strength, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and wisdom. And leave a comment below, telling us about a time when you found the strength to stand up for yourself. Your story might inspire someone else to find their courage too.